This happened about 3 years ago during summertime. I was riding my motorbike in the mountains of Gifu. All morning long, it had been very bright and sunny out. Then suddenly, the pitter-patter of rain started up out of nowhere. I came across a rest stop area and pulled in to take a short break. In the service area, there was a toilet and some shops in a building with a wooden roof. There was also a table and a little bench in what looked to be a little hut. As I was using the toilet, the rain really began to pour down, and thunder started to echo through the mountains. The rain didn't seem as if it would stop anytime soon, so I thought I'd better change into my emergency raincoat. I took off my backpack and headed towards the sheltered hut. While I was getting my raincoat out of my backpack, I put my other things down on the table. I casually glanced up, only to see an elderly couple sat right opposite to me on the bench. They hadn't been there just a second ago. When did they show up? I didn't really care about that too much, though. I was more worried about when this damn thunderstorm was going to stop already. I stared at the sky for 2 to 3 minutes, trying to figure out what this crazy weather was going to do next. The elderly couple that had showed up out of nowhere didn't say a single word. Things started to feel a little bit uncomfortable, a little awkward, if you will, so I tried to break the silence. "This rain started up real suddenly, huh?" The old man talked to me in a dead flat voice. It's always raining. It only just started to rain, though. What the hell was he talking about? They both looked at the sky and not at me, so I didn't get a good look at their faces. "Man, if I don't take a quick rest, I'll never make it home," I said. The old man paused for a couple of seconds and said, "I really feel for the ones who won't make it, huh?" What a weird thing to say. I could suddenly hear some voices shouting in the distance. When I looked around, the old couple had disappeared. That's all I can really remember. Next thing I know, I was jolted awake. I opened my eyes to find I was being shaken by some random guy. He looked about 30 years old or something. "Hey, are you all right?" He looked very concerned while he was shaking my shoulder. I asked him what was going on and what had happened. He said he'd seen me when he pulled in to use the rest area's toilet. Apparently, I was climbing over the safety railings onto the mountain path close to the wharf. I was stood dangerously close to a cliff's edge. He said I looked completely dazed and disoriented, so he had to jump over and stop me from jumping off, or whatever the hell it was I was going to do. I really have no recollection of that, though. I must have been unconscious for all of 2 minutes at the most. I still very clearly remembered the rain, but as I mentioned it, the guy who saved me from jumping off the cliff edge said that it hadn't rained at all that day. Well, yeah, it must have been raining because, look, I pointed to my raincoat only to discover that I didn't have it on. I looked around me and there were no puddles, no wet ground, or any sort of sign it had been raining either. Last year, 3 friends and I went motorbiking along the mountain paths of Yuta Takayama. We took a break in the rest area. It looked kind of cool actually, like an old cabin. It was pretty great because there was no one else around really. One of my friends, let's call him A, was laying down and stretching out on the bench. Another friend, who we'll call B, was taking in the scenery. It was extremely beautiful in this area. I guess we had stayed there relaxing for about 30 minutes or so, when black clouds began to gather overhead. It looked as if a downpour was on the cards. I quickly headed toward the sheltered area by the bench that A was lying down at. He was fast asleep, so I shook him awake. He wouldn't wake up though. He was out like a light. As the thunderstorm stirred and raged, we noticed an elderly couple who'd suddenly appeared to take shelter. "Hey there, it's a real weatherly nightmare, isn't it?" The old man replied. "Yeah, it truly is." As B and I talked, the old couple sat there in silence and just stared at A, who was still sleeping. I found this couple very creepy. I didn't like the way they were staring at my friend. I didn't want to stick around them for much longer. The thunder was cracking all around us though, and it made me and B jump up in surprise. Apparently, it was loud enough to wake A up as well. He shot up straight away and said, "Did you see their faces?" I had no idea what he was talking about. I looked around and noticed that the old couple were now gone. B seemed confused. He ran out of the hut only to come back in and say there were only our bikes in the parking area. Where the hell did that old couple go? We were out in the middle of the mountains. It was impossible to get around by foot out here. Man, I can't feel that horrible feeling anymore. We asked A what he was talking about. While I was sleeping, I felt something terrible, kind of like a nightmare. I opened my eyes and that elderly couple was approaching me. When they sat down, I pretended to be asleep. "Oh, so you were awake the whole time? You heard us talking then?" Yeah, for some reason I really didn't want those guys to come near me. My friend was shaking out. He was really stressed out, and their disappearance seemed to have rattled him. He always liked to pretend to be asleep when something was about to go down. We really have no idea what was going on with that couple, or why they gave off such a strange and ominous feeling. I used to work for a small trucking company that would deliver frozen product to stores across several states. For the most part, I would do 3 or 4 deliveries before heading back to the warehouse and then heading home. Every once in a while, though, we would have a long delivery round where we would end up too far to head back that same day. We would have to sleep somewhere overnight before heading back. Usually, I just pull over the truck into a truck stop and rest for a few hours, then get back on the road. Anyway, I was scheduled for a long delivery on this day, and I knew I wouldn't get back until pretty damn late the next day. I got ready and headed out. Nothing really happened the entire way there. I drove the route, unloaded the truck, and started to head back. It was pretty late though, around 1 in the morning or so. I figured I should stop and rest for an hour or two before continuing on the way back. The last sign I'd seen for a truck stop said 40 miles ahead though, so I still had quite a bit of a ways to go before getting there. I tend to space out for long periods of time when driving down long straight roads, especially this late at night when nobody else is out driving. All of a sudden though, I thought I saw something flickering in my side mirror. I looked over and noticed headlights shining from right behind the trailer. I couldn't see the car that these were coming from at all though. Usually that meant the car was in my blind spot, too close to the back for me to see. I continued down the road at the same speed, waiting for this car to get into the other lane and pass me by. To my surprise though, whoever this was staying right behind me at the exact same distance. This was starting to really bother me. I knew if I had to brake for any reason, this guy was for sure going to hit me. The truck stop was just a few miles ahead though, so I tried to ignore them for the rest of the way there. Finally, I saw the sign for the rest area and started to pull in. As I was turning, I checked my mirrors again and saw the car start to slow down. They continued to follow me, even into the parking lot. I honestly wasn't sure what to make of this at this point. I figured maybe I'd accidentally cut him off a while back or something, and he wanted to scream at me about it. I'd gotten a lot of angry drivers in my years of trucking, so I was pretty used to being yelled at. I'd never had someone follow me like this though. I pulled into an open spot and shifted into park. The car slowly trailed in behind me and got closer and closer to the back before eventually stopping. Once again, they had parked too close for me to actually see them in the mirrors. At this point, I was getting a bit weirded out. I got out and started walking around to the back to question them. Almost as soon as I slammed my driver door shut, though, they slammed it in reverse and drove away in such a rush that I couldn't even see their license plate. I could tell that whoever was driving was an older man, though. The car was white and had patches of rust all over. It looked somewhat similar to one of those old police cars with the front bumper bars. I stood out there by the back of the truck for a couple of minutes, making sure everything was still securely locked and that the person wouldn't be coming back. I then got back in the truck and turned it off. I double-checked all the doors to make sure they were locked, and did one quick glance out all the windows to make sure there were no more cars around. Then I laid back and closed my eyes. All of a sudden, I heard a bang echo through my trailer. I checked my watch and saw that almost 2 hours had passed by, and now it was a little past 3 a.m. There was another loud bang, this time even louder. I looked over in the side mirror and saw a faint shadow moving around towards the back. This time I got really freaked out. I grabbed the small knife I kept in the middle compartment and started making my way back there. This time, though, I left the driver's door open so as to not make any noise. As I got closer, I crouched down a little and looked underneath the trailer. I could clearly see someone standing right up against the back of the truck. Their car was right behind them, with its headlights turned off. Once I saw that, a rush of fear ran through my body. I decided not to approach any further, and instead shouted out to them. My voice was admittedly a little bit shaky, but it seemed to do the trick. They rushed into their car and sped off. Looking at the back door, there were scratches all over the lock, and clear marks as if they were trying to cut it open. I looked around to see if any other trucks could have seen the incident, but the lot was pretty empty. After a couple of minutes, I ended up just getting back on the road and headed straight home. Nothing else happened for the rest of the trip. I always assumed this was just a guy trying to steal from my trailer, but obviously he didn't know I was on my way back from a delivery, and the whole trailer was empty. Anyways, it was still pretty damn unnerving. This happened to me during my early years of trucking, and I still get paranoid sometimes, with a feeling a car may be following right behind me, without me being able to see them. Going to see my family during the summer is quite fun. Traveling 3 days by car, after getting there, we would have about 3 good weeks ahead of us to spend in Nebraska. I myself am from Pennsylvania. I was really excited when my aunt asked us to stay with her. I mean, she was a pretty good aunt. We were already 4 days into the vacation, and I wanted to stay up late one night. I opened up my laptop and decided to Skype my friend Brody. We talked for about 2 hours, until my aunt's dog suddenly started barking upstairs. I'm ashamed to admit I grabbed the dog and told him to shut up. Brody and I continued our conversation, but the dog would not stop barking. This time, I chalked it up to probably being my sister, who had just come in through the door. I felt a bit relieved that she was here now, but she went right to bed. It was now about 2:45 in the morning. Brody and I had already finished our conversation. As I lay there trying to get some sleep myself, the dog began barking once more. At this point, I was getting quite annoyed. I wanted to go to sleep and I was exhausted. Right as I was about to get angry, though, I heard a tapping on the window behind me. I was in the living room, and there was this glass window, a large one that made up a majority of the wall. I was already a bit creeped out thanks to the dog's barking, not to mention I was not that familiar with my aunt's place. When I heard this tapping, I was expecting the worst. It was common for drunks to wander around this area. The place was almost infamous for it, so when I turned around to look at what was out there, I was expecting some random drunk to be tapping at the window. Yeah, my aunt lived a little too close to the bar for sure. Sure enough, as I turned around, I could see at the window there was a bald man staring in at me. I jumped out of my skin when I saw him. He looked sweaty and dirty. He was swaying about back and forth. He indeed looked to be very drunk. He then tapped again, even though I was already looking at him. He began speaking to me, muffled by the glass. "Hey there, don't be rude to your dog. I heard everything you said to that poor thing. Just because it's barking doesn't mean it's your worst nightmare. That would be me." He then started this freakish laugh, as if he thought that was the funniest thing in the world. He then bolted away as fast as he could around the side of the house, looking like he was about to trip the whole time. It was a bit too dark to actually see his face, or where he'd actually gone. I wasn't entirely sure if I should call the cops or wake someone up. Sure, you might say it was some drunk playing a prank, but this guy really seemed to want to scare me. It makes me wonder what he might have done if there was no wall or glass separating us. Alcohol does tear away your judgment and your inhibitions. That incident made me realize that no matter where you are in the world, nothing is really perfectly safe. Not unless you're in a place with people you absolutely know and trust. The last thing you want is to experience that sort of thing. So be safe out there, everyone. Be sure to shut your blinds and be nice to your dog as well. My sister and I went to a Jack in the Box during the summer of 2016. We grabbed our stuff and sat at the table closest to the window. Honestly, I really hated being alone in that place. It didn't make me feel that much better being with my sister either. Something about that area was just weird. I suddenly remembered that I should buy my mom some food to bring back home to her as well. I got up to the counter and ordered her some food, then rejoined my sister. As I came back though, I noticed my sister now looked quite frightened and weirded out. She said that this weird-looking homeless guy kept on staring at her. We both turned around in our booth and tried to eat our food, ignoring this weird guy. What happened next completely terrified me though. All of a sudden, another guy began running out of the store with this little girl. I thought she must have still been in school. She looked like she was 5 or 6 years old. Maybe they were running out like that because it was early in the morning and they were late for school or something. We were eating there pretty early. I was terribly wrong though. It took me a moment to remember that day was actually a school holiday. No one would be running to get to school. Plus, the look on their faces looked like they were both quite creeped out. I could feel knots in my stomach suddenly. My sister grabbed me by the arm and practically dragged me out of there. I tugged my arm away, quite confused and surprised. I asked her what was wrong. She kept staring behind me back into the restaurant. Well, if that father and daughter were running away, they had to be running away from something. We need to leave too. I turned around to look back, only to see that coming out of the doors of the Jack in the Box was that same homeless man. He was looking at my sister still and had what looked to be a knife in his hand. He was smiling, revealing a lot of missing teeth. He began stumbling towards us, slowly but surely moving. We ran away from him. All the while, we could hear him calling her name, my sister's name, perfectly. Neither of us, to this day, have any idea how that man even knew it. It really makes me wonder how long that man must have been watching my sister. After that, we never went back to that Jack in the Box ever again. If you ever go out like that, even when you're with somebody, always be aware of your surroundings, because there's no telling what might happen around you at any moment. What that man could have done had we not noticed him in time could have been quite a lot worse. The summer I turned 27, my boyfriend of 3 years invited me to stay over at his parents' place for a week. They were heading off on some month-long vacation around Europe, so they asked him to watch their house while they were going to be gone. A big reason was they needed someone to take care of Buster, their 7-year-old beagle. Instead of staying there all alone, my boyfriend asked me to come keep him company. It was super fun having all that privacy, and it was kind of emotional too, seeing how things might play out if we stayed together and achieved our career goals. It was also summer, and with both of us being teachers, neither of us had any real commitments or anything like that. While Jay's parents were in Europe, we had our own little staycation right there in that house. I arrived on Friday evening and stayed all the way until late Thursday night, only occasionally heading home to grab a change of clothes or something out of my fridge. That Thursday, we stayed in bed until late in the morning, then headed out to get brunch at our favorite spot. I ordered my usual and he ordered his. It was a nice little brunch date like that always put me in a great mood. I was walking out of the cafe shop and back towards his car. I was in a really good mood at that point. I distinctly remember, though, the moment I lost some of that good feeling, having spotted a guy across the street sitting in his car and very clearly staring at me. I did a double take just to make sure I wasn't imagining things, but no, there he was just staring back at me with this vacant expression on his face. I didn't want to say anything to Jason, my boyfriend, just in case things escalated and it ruined our day for no reason. Once we were safely back in his car, I told him about the guy who was staring us down. He reacted exactly how I expected him to, kind of mad at first, but then trying to make light of it by telling me how pretty I looked. I didn't mention it to him, but that wasn't the kind of look the guy was giving me, like he was trying to stare at me because he found me hot or something. It was just this expressionless 1,000-yard stare, like he didn't give a crap if I knew he was staring or not. That was definitely the creepiest part. We got back to his parents' place, hung out some more, and playfully argued about where to order takeout from. We had a generally nice afternoon together, and dinner was quite good as well. I won with my suggestion of Korean food. Once again, a nice time was had by all. With us being teachers, we were conditioned to have an earlier bedtime, so after a few glasses of wine and a little bit of Big Bang Theory, we took a shower together and then went to sleep. As I mentioned earlier, we were taking care of Buster, the old beagle, that I had come to absolutely adore by that period of my stay. He was just so chill and friendly to everyone. I swear, I had never seen a dog so hungry for cheese of all things. Buster had apparently gotten pretty smart in his older years, too. Whenever he needed the bathroom, he'd just walk up to the back patio doors of the house, sit his butt down, and just stare at you and whine if you didn't immediately get up to let him out into the yard. It was cute and very polite of him. I remember that night waking up and needing to pee really bad. When I was in the bathroom, though, I could hear Buster whining. There was no scratching, but he was still whining at the door. After I finished with my business, I figured I'd go let Buster out to have his. Right as I got to the top of the stairs, though, I saw him right there in his doggy bed, not by the door. He was still whining all the same. He was also not lying down in his bed like he'd usually be doing. Instead, he was sat bolt upright. There was only a little bit of light going downstairs from the hallway I was in, but I could see him looking up at me, just like he'd do if he needed to go to the bathroom. I walked downstairs to him and said, "What's up, buddy?" Right then, when I got to him, he turned his head to look at something in the TV room. He kept staring until I too looked in that direction. There, sitting on one of the two couches that faced each other, was a man wearing dark clothing and a ski mask. Before I could react, he had a gun pointed at me and gestured to the couch in front of me, then told me to sit down. It was like I wasn't in control of my own body anymore. I knew I shouldn't do what he was telling me. I knew I should run or try to scream, try to hide or anything to avoid getting with arm's reach. I still did what he told me, though. I sat down on the couch and tried to speak, tried to tell him that we'd do anything if he wouldn't hurt us. Instead, he cut me off. Is Jason here? The fact he knew my boyfriend's name, I can't even begin to describe how much that terrified me. If this was just some random break-in, they might at least be happy with some money or valuables or something like that. But knowing my boyfriend by name meant this must be personal. I did the only thing I could. I lied and shook my head. I remember how dark the guy's eyes looked in the low lighting, and how they never blinked once. After I shook my head, he then asked me in the same whispered voice, "Why is Jason not here if his car is parked outside?" Again, I felt that same terror. He must know Jason quite well. What the hell was he into, though, that a man with a gun would come breaking into his parents' house in the middle of the night? I think what scared me more than anything was not knowing what happened to get us into this kind of mess in the first place. I could die never knowing what the hell he'd done. Just 1 minute I'd be there wondering in horror, and the next there'd be nothing but a void of unanswered questions. The masked man asked me again if Jason was there, and more specifically if he was upstairs sleeping. I knew it was pointless to lie again, so this time I said nothing and did nothing. I just waited for whatever came next. Maybe he might shoot me and go upstairs and do the same thing to Jason, or maybe he'd just walk right past me and I'd have to listen to the last moments of my boyfriend's life. Instead, the guy seemed to take a completely different persona all of a sudden. He stopped pointing the gun at me. Not completely, but not directly at me anymore. He then sank back into the couch and asked if I knew why he was there. I shook my head in response. I remember how he laughed silently to himself and said, "Of course not." That was one of the few times I found the strength to speak, and although I wanted to ask him why he was there, all that came out was a simple, "Please don't hurt us." The guy leaned forward again and then told me in words that'll stay with me until I die, "I'm not gonna hurt either of you. I was gonna. That's the reason I came here. I was gonna shoot your dumbass boyfriend. You know why?" I shook my head, and he instantly responded, "Because he's been cheating with my wife." It was only then that I noticed he had something in his other hand, a folded-up piece of paper. He then put the gun on the armrest of the couch and unfolded it, then put it down in front of me. I saw it was some kind of collage. Each picture was of some kind of text message exchange from an app called Telegram. That was all except for one, which showed the contact details of one of the participants. It was Jason. It was 100% him. I assumed the other participant was the guy's wife. I don't know why he brought it with him. Maybe to show Jason so he couldn't deny it away. Maybe to show someone like me so they'd know it wasn't just some kind of mistake. Either way, once he'd successfully broke in and bumped into me instead of Jason, he decided against the second half of his plan. That's something I consider to be divine intervention, because I'm certain if it was Jason that had woken up and gone downstairs to check on Buster instead of me, he would have died right there before I even knew what was happening. Because it was me, though, someone the intruder saw as an innocent party, it gave him second thoughts. He got up to leave. I was filled with a wave of relief so strong I could have burst into tears. "So, I guess you're gonna call the cops now, right?" I shook my head for what seemed like the 20th time in minutes. "Nah, now you're gonna do it, and I'm dumb as hell for doing this in the first place." I felt a few last pangs of anxiety as he walked towards the patio doors, which were ever so slightly ajar. He must have somehow gotten in without waking us up that way. Now that I think about it, though, maybe he did wake me up, and that's when I realized I needed to pee. I guess that's neither here nor there, though. The last thing I said before he walked out was a really shaky thank you. I realize now that I was thanking him for 3 reasons. Firstly, it wasn't a thank you, so much as trying to confirm he wasn't about to change his mind and kill both of us. Second, it was a thank you for not hurting us. But thirdly, it was actually me thanking him for telling me what Jason was doing. At the time, I felt very protective of Jay and was glad he wasn't hurt. I know that somewhere in there, though, he had planted a bizarre seed of gratitude in my head. After I thanked him, he stopped, looked back, and said he should be thanking me right now. I feel a kind of crazy guilt typing this out, but my first instinct was to call the cops. There was no guarantee he wasn't going to change his mind and come back. I don't know if he'd been drinking or was crazy or anything else that might cause him to do something he'd regret. And that's when I stumbled back upstairs on trembling legs, grabbed my phone, and called 911. Jason woke up in the process. It took a few minutes of describing what happened to the operator before I was able to ask Jason about the events. The moment I did, I knew it was all true. I'd spent 3 years with him learning all his little quirks and tells. I could read his facial expressions like a book. What Jason's face said to me after I asked was, "How do you know about this?" He tried to tell me he didn't know what I was talking about. The guy was obviously mental ill with some sort of delusions or something, and the cops better get there quick. I even remember him calling me baby over and over. All that I felt in that moment was that I stopped loving him. It was a sick joke. I think it was the way he used that threat to our lives as a perfect excuse to try and not talk about Melanie. How he'd been playing his hide the salami with her for the past effing who knows how long. He kept on saying stuff like, the only thing that matters right now is we're safe and everything can wait. I don't know if I had ever felt that kind of anger before. And when the cops finally arrived to take statements from each of us, I had to struggle to keep myself together. It might sound kind of weird, but I don't really blame the guy for being as angry as he was. If my ex-boyfriend had kept his junk in his pants, there would have been no reason for anyone to plan any messed up revenge killings. Sure, the guy should have gone about it in a responsible way, but we don't live in a perfect world where everyone else does everything they're supposed to, and none of the stuff they're not. If they did, I might not have this terrible memory now. After my parents got divorced, I really disliked being with my dad. My mom and dad still lived in the same neighborhood, although not really close together. I spent most of my time with my mom, although I did have a room at both of their houses. My dad had gotten really depressed after the divorce. He spent a lot of the time that I was with him drinking and not really paying much attention to me. I only spent the occasional weekend over at his place, and only when he really insisted on it. Since I was spending Christmas with my mom, he insisted I spend the weekend before Christmas over at his place. My parents arranged all of that. I was around 10 years old at the time. I think that's important to know if you're to understand some of the decisions I make in this story. It was a pretty lousy day ever since I walked home from school to my dad's place. It had been snowing pretty heavily all day long, so walking to the house caused my feet to get pretty soaked because of the snow. Once I arrived at my dad's place, he had already begun drinking, so the night was not going so great. The only thing I did like was the fact it was snowing outside. I sat at the window drinking hot chocolate and watching the snow fall. My dad drank so much that he eventually fell asleep in his easy chair. It wasn't unusual, but it made the night as bad as any other. I was only 10, and I really didn't know what to be doing in the house basically by myself. It wasn't the first time that I completely had to take care of myself, but I didn't really like it. It seemed like I was wasting my time and my night being here at this house. And that's when I got the brilliant idea that I should just walk over to my mom's place. I had made the walk before. It was a bit long and I wasn't supposed to be out so late at night. Maybe my mom might be asleep or out of the house at the moment, but I could not stand spending any more time here with my passed out father. I bundled up as best as I could with what I had on hand, and then I set out into the snow. It had been really snowing hard, and it had been building up on the ground this whole time. That made it a much harder walk out there than it had been walking home from school, but I was determined to make it back to my mom's house. I was moving really slowly through the snow. As I walked by each streetlight, I saw just how hard and heavy it was really falling. A few times I felt I should turn back around and go back to my dad's house, but I figured it would be fine when I eventually made it home. I had gotten maybe about halfway when something happened. A door opened suddenly and an older man came out onto his porch. He started talking to me, asking me if I wanted to come into his house and get warm. He said it was way too cold and wet out there, and that if I came into his house, he could call my father for me to come and pick me up. I waved him off, telling him I was fine. I was just trying to get home, and I could make it there all on my own. And that was when he started offering me things like hot chocolate and fudge if I came into the house. He was making me feel uneasy. I was not supposed to talk to adults I didn't know. I wished I could have walked faster, but I would have had to walk in the street for that, and I wasn't allowed to do that either. I wanted to get away from this man. As I tried to go on, I kept note of him from the corner of my eye. The man began coming down his front walk quickly, coming right for me. I didn't think much about it, but I got scared out of my wits when he suddenly grabbed me by the arm. He started trying to pull me toward the front walk, and I knew he was trying to get me into his home. I was terrified, and I struggled my best to get away from him. I began screaming out and yelling at him to let me go, but the guy was dragging me, and he was a lot bigger than me. He was winning easily. There was no doubt he was going to get me inside his house. I got extremely lucky, however, as a snowplow just happened to be coming down the street at the same time. It caught the attention of the man dragging me. I was able to use the icy slickness of the sidewalk to knock him off balance and throw him onto his back. I then jumped over the snowbank separating the sidewalk from the road and in front of that snowplow. The man who grabbed me got up and started running back towards the house. The snowplow stopped, and a big man got out of the cab. I ran over to him and told him the man in that house had just tried to abduct me and asked if he could help me out. The driver let me into his truck and used his phone to call the police. He waited in front of the house until they arrived, which took a while. When they arrived, they went and confronted the man in the house. He was arrested for attempting to abduct me. The police then took me to my mom's house. I did get in some trouble for attempting to walk in the first place. Mostly though, my parents were both happy nothing bad happened to me. That was the closest call I ever had in my life. This happened back in 2021. I, 27 and female, had just moved from Melbourne to rural Australia to live with my fiancé. At that time, he was still only my boyfriend. He was 29 and was on military posting at the army base. The town we moved to was pretty isolated, about 4 to 5 hours to reach any large city in each direction. It was still big enough though, with a few different suburbs surrounding the main area. Neither of us really knew the area at all before moving, and this led us to get a house in a pretty sketchy part of town. I'll try to explain the setup of the house first, as this will be important later. The house we moved into was quite old. It had huge glass windows everywhere, including the entirety of the front of the house. Because of this, you could easily see into the kitchen, living room, and one of the unused bedrooms without coming down the driveway. There was an old metal fence to the left of the house, which was about 1.5 meters tall. It led directly into the backyard. To the right of the house was a small path, hidden by an overgrowth of bush and plants from the front. With a locked gate the height of the house that led to the back semi-enclosed patio and back door. The path was right next to the kitchen window. You couldn't exactly see out when the light was on, but you could see in if you were outside. When coming in through the back door from the patio, you would walk through the laundry with an adjacent bathroom, into the kitchen with our bedroom off to the left, and a second one directly next to ours. My boyfriend was out doing military stuff for a week, so I had been home alone. It was summer during this time, and it was quite hot. The house had terrible AC, so I had been sleeping with the windows open, and even left the back door wide open on accident when falling asleep a few times. I've always felt safe in Australia, and have lived mostly alone ever since I was 18. I didn't really have an issue with it. It comes to Friday, my 5th day there alone, and I decided to walk into town and find something to do. The walk took about an hour each way, and when I finally got home, I was looking forward to doing nothing besides getting out of this damn heat. I spent most of the afternoon in the living room, playing PlayStation and watching TV. I had heard a few weird noises, though, down the side of the house on the path next to the kitchen, leading to the patio. The guy who lived next to us had a workshop of some kind, though, so I assumed it must have just been him tinkering around. I'm one of those people who lay in bed before they're ready to go to sleep. As I laid there, around 10 p.m. or so, I was doing my nightly scroll of Reddit. This really saved my ass, as I read a story that prompted me to get up out of bed and go close and lock the back door, which I'd almost forgotten to do. The back door had a normal lock, then a reinforced deadlock with a key screwed into the wall. 45 minutes or so later, still hearing the neighbor tinkering around occasionally, I decided I was ready to actually go to bed. I go and start turning off all the lights, including the back patio light and kitchen light. I lay down in bed and am finishing up my mindless scrolling when I hear the noises again. This time, though, it was much louder. Still, it could just be that the guy was working in his workshop even harder, or maybe some kind of animal rustling things around. I was about to put down my phone and write it off, when suddenly, I heard a loud bang at my back door. I instantly felt like everything was going in slow motion. I just knew someone was kicking the back door in. I thought to myself, this cannot be happening. Then came another bang, and another. It was all so loud, and it felt like the house itself was shaking. I could hear multiple points of glass shattering, and the banging continuing. This went on for what felt like an eternity, but was only a few minutes. In my panic, after the second or third bang, thinking I could scare them off by pretending a man was here, I yelled out in the deepest voice I could, then slammed my bedroom door closed. Obviously, that didn't really work. I locked it and called 000, then pushed my bed up against the door. The banging was still going on, even as I called the police. Just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. There was nowhere else to hide, so I was crouched down in the corner of the room near my bed. While on the phone with police, I could hear someone starting to kick in the bedroom door as well. I was screaming at this point. I don't even remember what I was saying to the operator, or what they were saying to me. I remember praying the police arrived before these people got inside my room. I could hear sirens. The banging on the bedroom door stopped immediately, and I saw torches shining into the bedroom window. Because I was so scared, I couldn't really comprehend what the operator was saying to me. I had no idea if those torchlights were whoever had just kicked in my back door and bedroom door, or if it was the police finally arriving. Now, I don't remember how I realized this, but it turned out it was the police outside. The next thing I remember, I was in the kitchen surrounded by 10 officers, crying and trying to explain what had happened. I was so inconsolable that the police had to use my boyfriend's army photos on the fridge to get his details to call the duty officer to allow him to come home. Once I calmed down a bit and my boyfriend got back, I saw the back gate to the patio was completely broken. The bedroom door was cracked and the back door had been thrown off its hinges with the deadlock completely ripped out of the wall. The laundry window had been smashed in as well. There were 2 sets of clear footprints on the door from where they had kicked the door in. I checked my phone and called 000 at 12:04 a.m. and had been on the phone for less than 5 minutes. What I think happened is that they must have followed me back from my walk. They could easily see from the road that I was alone and had been watching me on the path next to the kitchen for the evening. The noises I thought were the neighbor tinkering must have been them, and once I turned the lights off, they finally made their move. I don't think they anticipated the back door would be so hard to break down though, which is why they smashed the laundry room window. They couldn't unlock the deadbolt without the key though, so I guess they broke it down somehow. Luckily, that extra time saved me from whatever they were trying to do. The guys weren't ever caught, and we ended up moving house within the next few weeks. My boyfriend and I even ended up breaking up, as he was regularly out on duty and I couldn't stand to be home at night anymore. I would panic, cry, and not sleep until the sun would come up, and it put too much strain on the relationship. It wasn't until later that I realized I was experiencing PTSD, and after I worked through it, we got back together. I now live back in my home city in an apartment building that has 24/7 security, a billion cameras, and I got 2 dogs as well.